Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Just making sure folks are connecting to audio all right. My name is Jake Tkaczyk, and welcome here for our artist discussion panel, Gender Blending, Examining, Exploring, and Subverting Gender Through Clown. As I said, my name is Jake. My pronouns are he, him, and I will be your host for this afternoon. We're thrilled to have you all here today for what promises to be a very fascinating discussion with some fantastic artists from across the country. Before we move on to introducing our guests today, I'd like to acknowledge that our festival, the Play the Fool Festival, gathers in Amiskwaciwaskahegan, known colonially as Edmonton, Alberta. This traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples, the First Nations of Treaty 6 and the Métis Nation of Region 4. This land and the waterways that are here hold thousands of years of history. It was land that was fought over, land that gives back, and land that continues to hold the spirit, strength, love, stories, and traditions of the original caretakers and stewards who have been here for thousands of years. In the spirit of the treaty and its oral agreements, the Play the Fool Festival would like to acknowledge that we all benefit from this land, and it's our duty as treaty people to protect, nourish, and respect it. Play the Fool strives to create a space that encourages artists to tell their stories, that challenges us to think, feel, and laugh. So thank you all for being here today. I'd be remiss if I didn't say a huge thank you to some of the folks and organizations that make this whole festival possible. Play the Fool Festival and Hit That Jive Productions for having us here today. Thank you to them. Thanks to Christine Leziak, Festival Director, Julie Corrali, Festival Producer, Kijo Gautama, Associate Festival Director, and our panelists, Charlie Peters, Candice Roberts, Zachary Parsons-Lozinski, Grums, and Adam Lazarus. Also, a huge thank you to our tech wizard and stage manager, Lindy Mullen, our fabulous live captioner, Tanzi Reule, and of course, to all of our funders and supporters who make this festival possible. Throughout the course of this webinar, we encourage you either to use the chat on YouTube or the comment box on YouTube if you're joining us via that medium today, or you can type questions in the Q&A box if you're here with us on Zoom. We hope that there will be a time to get through some questions at the end if there are some that come up. I would now like to pass over hello to some of our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with Charlie Peters. Hi, Charlie.
Hello, as I pop into the world here. Thanks, Jake. So hi, everyone. My name is Charlie Peters. I use Z, Hugh, and Hughes pronouns. I am coming to you from Amiskwaciwaskahegan, colonially known as Edmonton, on Treaty 6 territory, Métis region of Alberta, number 4. I was born and raised farther to the east on Treaty 6 territory in what is known as Saskatoon, and my family traces its history through the stories of settler colonialism to Poland, to England, and to the Campbell lands of Scotland. And so I'm a theater artist and clown and also a young scholar. And I think that's what brings me here. But I think if I'm not mistaken, we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about our practices later.
Yeah, that's right. Awesome.
All right. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Here. Yeah, thank you. Adam.
Hey, everybody. My name's Adam Lazarus, dialing in from Toronto. Shana Tova as well, for anyone who's celebrating Happy New Year. So what can I tell you about me? I'm a theater artist. I practice making art. I'm also a teacher, and I believe in disruption. And I'd say that that's my main bent, is I'm always sort of looking at what's happening and observing and then figuring out me as me. How can I sort of highlight the problems with the world as I see it? And gender is definitely a massive part of that in some of the work that I've done, and as it moves forward a lot, I think, as a teacher and as an instructor, as I try to pass on the bouffeton to other people as I age. Okay, that's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Grums.
Hello. I'm Grums. My professional name is S.E. Grummett. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a transgender artist, originally from Treaty 6, Saskatoon. But I'm here in Edmonton, and I'm actually in the theater where Play the Fool is happening because I'm doing my show here, Something in the Water, and I have a matinee today. So I will be doing that after this. And if you're in Edmonton, please come check it out. It's the kids' version of my very nardy queer adult show. And yeah, I'm a theater maker and puppeteer, and I like to make queer stories and tell queer stories. So, yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Grams. Candy.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Candy or Candice, and I am a cisgendered queer woman living on the Coast Salish territories, also known as the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. What can I say? I am a multidisciplinary artist with a heavy leaning into the clown work. I love to make theater, and I've discovered theater can hold all of my favorite arts, making music and dance. And I'm very curious about conundrum, and the definition of clown to me comes as hope in the face of failure. So it's like leaning into failure and studying that, and kind of accidentally fell into gender just by looking at my own conundrums in my own life. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Candice. And Zachary.
Hello, my name is Zachary Parsons-Lozinski. My drag name is Lilith Fair. I am an AMAB non-binary drag artist and playwright living in Calgary, Alberta. And all of my fellow panelists are very impressive people doing very impressive things. And I make most of my living taking $5 bills out of the open mouths of bachelorettes while hosting bingo.
Awesome. Thanks, Zachary. Thanks, Lila. So just for our folks online here, I just wanted to let you know that this panel won't necessarily be like a how to do gender as performance type panel. It's more so going to be an artist discussion based on our practices and praxis rather, and the praxis of the folks on the panel. So with that in mind, I think it'll be important to kind of understand the context of which you are all working. So I'd like to know, can you speak about your practice and or your life and ways in which you explore gender as a theme? And I'll pass it over to you, Candice, to start, or if anybody, yeah, we'll start with Candice.
Sure, thank you very much. Well, let's see, my first solo show character, I was creating a character, a silent character who had a bird for a heart. And I very much was like deciding whether to make, what gender to make this character. And as a person growing up, conditioned as a femme, as a girl child, there's been a lot of pressure on being beautiful, or what is beautiful, and appearance. And I didn't want that to be any part of my show at all. I didn't want that to be anything to do with the character. So I chose the male character, which is an interesting thought in itself. And then I went on to create Larry, which was built from my family, basically. The characters, my dad and my brother and where I grew up. This character is very much inside me. I just started mimicking my family, and it became really funny. But also I was able to speak to my experience as a woman, how I felt, or how my experience dealing with these men in the 80s in the small town through Larry. And then with conundrum, I started thinking about Larry, what would be his biggest conundrum to put him in? And I thought, wow, if he was to experience what it would be like to be a woman, that would be a problem for him. So I wanted to explore that. And then the show just literally wrote itself. It was very, very easy to create. And I found that a lot of people really resonated with it or connected, a lot of women. identified people connected with my experience through that character. There's another part of it is creating a character that's also lovable. He's a very lovable character, and I have to say a lot of the men where I grew up were also very lovable and misunderstood and misguided maybe. So very interesting. I've been told that there's a lot of risk in my show in that I created a character who could have alienated a lot of people, but instead people felt compassion and care for the character at the same time that they also hated him. So I think it's been a way to have people hear my story, or people that might not have been as open to hearing something like this. They've been able to see it and laugh at it and then receive the information, or laugh with it, I should say, and then receive the information. And everything in my show is based off of my own experience as a woman, not anyone else's. And I mean, it seems people have connected with it and related to my experience as well. But in no way am I saying that this is how it is for all women, or that Larry is the basis of all men out in the world. So anyways, that's a little bit about my practice and how gender has come into my play. But I have found a love in playing a different gender. Playing a man, playing Larry is so freeing for me. There's not the pressure of being beautiful or aesthetically pleasing. There's not a pressure of being right. Like, he does whatever he says is right. He has the confidence of an average white dude, you know, like he everything he says is right. So there's no pressure. It's so freeing to not have to second guess everything I'm going to say, or my safety, which has been my experience as a woman. And even here today, I'm very worried. There's a voice listening in the back of my head saying, are you saying all the right things? You know? So that's a little bit about my practice. And thank you for asking me. And I can't wait to hear what everyone else has to say.
Thanks, Candy. I'll open it up, and we'll kind of make it a little bit more fluid here. So if there's somebody else who wants to jump in right away. Yeah, Grubs, go for it. I see your eyes light
The
up.
eyeballs were saying no. Thank you for misreading visual cues. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I think as a trans person, I can't not make work about gender, because it's, I sort of started making my own stuff because there weren't parts for me. Like, I would go to auditions and being like, before I was out, I was like, am I a bad actor? Why can't I perform the gender in the way that they want me to? Why can't I'm feeling very much like a horse in a dress when they cast me in those things. And that was more about me and not being out. So now I make my own stuff because there's not really that many parts out there for trans people. And I'm really interested in clown and puppetry and mask and physical theater as a way of exploring gender beyond my body and how an audience perceives my body, and the assigned gender that they put on it when I go on stage. So I like using those tools to sort of twist that and play with that and queer that in my work, and trying to empower others to do the same through those tools. So I made a show called Something in the Water that was about my transition and the way that when I came out, I felt like a monster, and I felt like society treats trans people as monsters and as something unlovable and disgusting. So in the show, I turned into a giant squid monster as a way of sort of exploring those feelings and feeling like, does everybody not see that I'm just a squid monster? And they keep telling me that, no, I'm a girl. And so the squid monster in the show has to sort of disguise itself as a man or a normal human woman to try and pass and get away from the angry mob. And yeah, I wanted to make something that was really empowering for queer people in the audience. I think it's oftentimes, I set out to make a bouffant show about gender, actually, where I would yell at the audience and be like, what's your gender? And working with collaborators, it was like, no, you want to make something for the queerdo weirdos in your audience to see themselves and feel empowered and feel amazing. but that also can sort of take the piss out of gender binaries and these expectations that we put on people. So that's sort of my work, and I'm also interested in, as the next step coming out of this is, okay, I've made an identity show. I've made a show that's about my experience. It is just my experience, but it's an identity show, and it's a bit of a like gender 101. And so my next thing is to sort of examine that. Like, what does it mean to make an identity show? What does it mean to perform that for an audience? And how do our theaters and funders and audiences, what do they expect of trans bodies on stage? So yeah, that's kind of what I'm interested in, and a bit about my practice. And it's a lot of sewing tiny squid tentacles.
Thanks, Crumbs. Zachary.
Yeah. So I have been throughout my entire life, like probably one of the most flamboyantly gay people you'll ever meet. like any sort of stereotypical sort of like feminine thing that you could attribute to queerness, I sort of fall into that. And so it's something that I've been made fun of a lot throughout my life growing up as a queer person in Alberta, not just by other kids in schools, but in like family contexts as well. Like my extended family a lot was very religious, and then not my immediate family like in the same capacity, but like pressures from my extended family to my immediate family and how that sort of like impacted me. So it's like secondhand trauma being passed on. And so I was sort of raised to try and suppress a lot of my more feminine qualities. And then I went into theater. And I think despite stereotypes of what theater is, theater as an institution is still quite queer phobic. And so I, not in the same capacity as Grum's expressed their story, but I did find very similarly that there was not a lot of things for me as like a very tall, very feminine person, because those sorts of things just didn't exist, especially within the context of a school. And so I also was like, am I any good at this? And then I stumbled into the world of drag, which really appealed to me because it's drag is really interesting because it's like a simultaneous, of the most fabulous aspects of gender or lack of gender, because drag is really complicated. But then it's also like a really scathing satire and deconstruction and parody of societal expectations placed on gender. And then it also allowed me as an independent queer artist to take complete control over the when and where of my craft. So as a person working in that field now, I host a weekly drag show at a gay bar, and I host a 2 times a month bingo. And then I'm also a playwright. I just created a show called The House That Fucks for the Edmonton International Fringe Theatre Festival, which is basically a parody of myself deconstructing traumas surrounding queer sexuality that I inherited throughout my life. And it's very silly. And that's all.
Awesome. Thanks, Zachary. I'll pass it over to Charlie.
Thanks. So I, like many of you, it seems, had a very formal theater actor training. And then, grounds, thank you. And kind of got out and was making my own work, and increasingly just sort of feeling really called to more creative work, less interpreting other people's stuff, and sort of more sort of seeing what it was that I felt the need to share. And it was sort of a confluence of, at the same time I was going through my first clown training, I was really having all of these questions about gender and sexuality, like my own. And and just going, okay, there's a lot that I just haven't been looking at for a lot of my life. Just I've been really like very like violently and actively not engaging with. And so some of the reason this clowning speaks so much to me is because I was doing that training at the same time I was coming face to face with these things in my personal life. And as many of us know, clowning tends to make us look at ourselves in a very, very intense way. And so I came back from that training and started to work on a solo show called Many Fires, which was an exploration of masculinity, which was long before I was out or aware of my own sort of gender queer identity, and was an important stepping stone actually on that. The more I looked at my own masculinity, the more I kind of laughed. One of the final lines of the show is, "Can I grow up without being a man?" And at that time I was completely ignorant of the fact that might actually, mean something. That there, so my art was way ahead of my own sort of awareness in that. And shout out to Grums, who did the projections for that show, and as a wonderful collaborator. And then I went to school and did an MFA in theater practice, and I was thinking about collaboration, and that led me actually to the gender studies department. So I'm just finishing up an MA in gender and social justice studies, and a lot of my interest in that is the ways in which theater is still queerphobic and locked in very outdated ideas about gender and how gender is represented, and so that the part of my interest in going to the gender studies department is to go and be thinking about theater, but not in a theater department and not in a theater context. And I think it's been that's really blown my mind again and again and again in great ways. So I think those are the things. And I'm just starting out on a creation project on bisexuality and gender queerness, and how these are identities and queer experiences that get subsumed into other ones, and how bisexuality becomes understood in just how much it resembles homosexuality and heterosexuality, but not on its own terms, and how gender queerness gets understood as just how much it resembles sort of cis masculinity or cis femininity as opposed to its own sort of unit of analysis. So anyway, I'm at the very beginning of that project. So yeah.
Thanks, Charlie. Can't wait to hear more about that. Adam.
Yeah, that was awesome. So I listening to what everyone's saying, I had two thoughts. I guess I'll have so I'm cisgender, straight, white Jew. And I'm like, the two thoughts I had are, I did a show where I wanted to like call to task binary, I guess, like in analysis of what I was doing now, that's what I would have called it. But at the time I was like, God, people are so fucked up. And that's what I wanted to look at. And like, and I'm fucked up, and I do things that like perpetuate harm to different people. And I don't even know that I'm doing it. And what's that about? And as I get older, it's like so clear. And I think I'm a good person, but I'm not all the time. So I did a show about that, and then it ended up kind of hitting and striking a nerve of like calling a lot of people to task who perpetuate awful male behavior, and the problem is there, and it's not done. And so this is what I was thinking about listening to what you're saying is two things. The first one was when we talk about like queer phobic, who is the audience that we play for? And I've always wanted to sort of play for the opera house and tear it down whilst playing for the opera house. So that's kind of what I did with my last show. I kind of snuck in, and I'm like getting to like do that to like power. And it was, and then feeling a bit futile, like, oh, it doesn't change anything. And then feeling sad, but it does, but sometimes it doesn't on a mass scale that I hope. A friend of mine says the road is long, and it's like a reinvestment in, yes, the road is long. So that was one thing I thought about, is the how do we trick the audiences if we want to take them down? And then I thought about this other thing, is the role of art as I sometimes see it, is catharsis versus the world as is. So I think there's two kinds of shows I like to make. The one is where people leave feeling good and like we empower, and we like destroy the evil. And then the other one is there's a lot of work to do still, and we leave the audience feeling like shit. And they walk away with each other, arguing with each other, because that's where the work happens, is outside of the theater. And I think both are equally important. As I get older, and I'm a teacher, I question that I'm a teacher and I'm a creator as well. Like I'm an aging white Jew, right? And then I was like taught by white dudes, and like everyone's white who teaches, and mostly men throughout Europe who teach clown and Buffon, and they're like, I want to create space for the voice of the other. I'm like, what is that even? Who are you talking about? And like, do I talk like that? And how my practice has shifted as a teacher, like repeatedly, again and again and again and again. And I find this moment awesome as a teacher, because there's so I'm calling it past the bouffon, and it's like I don't want to. Why I think I'm saying the same thing again, but there should be a lot more teachers that are not straight white dudes or white dudes, or you know what I'm saying. And I feel like I have some awesome students who are like gonna kill us all with their awesome art. That's it.
Thanks, Adam. That's great. Thanks, everybody. I think we touched on a little bit about our personal experiences or reasons that motivated us to think, care, and create work that relates to gender. And of course, throughout the rest of the panel, I'm sure we'll hear more about that. I'm curious a little bit about now some of the challenges for you in this work, and how have you or are you navigating them? So challenges, and how are you or how have you navigated them? Is there anybody who wants to jump on that? Yeah, go for it, Zachary.
Coming from my practice as a drag artist, I would say that maybe the biggest challenge that you face is being taken seriously. I think is that as a drag artist, and I am not in the realm. Well, I think drag and clown are probably actually pretty similar in a lot of facets. Probably. I'm not gonna say definitively because I don't know. But I imagine that some things that the art forms share is that you're probably just kind of seen as one thing when you participate in those art forms. And so, like, I think that as a drag artist, I can put my authentic story into something. I can talk about the things that I'm passionate about, but there's still going to be a lot of people who consume that work and think, oh, well, that was just a very silly drag show. And so it sometimes makes it hard to continue the discussion beyond that, because people maybe don't want to give the credit to the art and the artist that maybe it deserves. And I think that the way to challenge that is to just keep doing it, to just keep existing, to just keep creating, to just keep forcing our stories and our art to be a part of the narrative, so that people have no choice but to hear what we're saying.
Can I jump in? Because
Absolutely.
Yeah, being taken seriously is like when we talk about queer phobia or transphobia in theater, and something I think about often is, like you said, Adam, I would love to play to opera houses, but I've had meetings with artistic directors who say, well, I could never program a queer show on the main stage, not here. Or TUA companies that go, well, we can't take queer shows into schools. Think of the children. Or that they're worried about the repercussions, or they're worried about the audience not showing up. And so I think one of the challenges to this work is getting in to be able to speak to the king, like being able to get to that place without having to hide what it is, what the show is. So I think about that a lot and how we can get into those spaces. Another challenge is like the stakes in this are just so much higher in making shows about this, because I don't get to take the nose off at the end of the day. I leave the theater and I'm still a trans person, and I have to go through the world like that, and I still have to fight to be recognized and legitimized. And I think for anybody who's trans or gender nonconforming, like that is a huge thing to take on. And we never get to just be an artist. Never. I just did the Edinburgh Fringe, and I wish I could just focus on my show, but so much of that festival was like having meetings with venues and having meetings with artists and talking about how we can make them spaces safer. And that work is all really important, but it's also on top of an already very full plate. So I think that is a huge challenge, is that like we don't get to just do the art. It's consultations and meetings and fighting to stop artists from doing harm, which I think is really important. It's fucking exhausting. So those are things I'm thinking about a lot.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that?
Riffing on a little bit of that, and this runs the risk, Grums, of getting into more labor for the artists. So I recognize the complexity of throwing this out there, but one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot as a dramaturgical practice is how I think of it, not just the dramaturgy of what's on the stage, but how we connect that to the world. What I think of as what happens before the curtain rises and after curtain call, in the opera house. And I think about this because I think one of the things that we as artists, especially artists who want to take on the world and do good and reflect, is sometimes we end up going, oh, I need to do it all myself, as if there's not a dialogue that's ongoing, as if people aren't doing this work outside of the theater, as if. And so one of the things I think that we have an opportunity to do is formally in partnerships and informally in learning, and like not inserting ourselves into, but learning from the discourses that are ongoing, so that we don't have to think that we have to suddenly figure out everything from scratch, as if we're not standing on people's shoulders and as if others aren't doing great work already. So, and I think to your point about teaching, Adam, I think this is the other thing. Sometimes we end up, I say this very boldly, thinking about only our craft or only our discipline or only the thing that we do. And this is what's been so wonderful for me personally about being in a gender studies department that is really open to me thinking about theater, but isn't full of theater people, right? Is all of a sudden there's ideas and thinkers and that I get to engage with that are writing about things that are applicable in the theater but aren't made for the theater. And so how do we start to do that work the bringing together, as opposed to the, oh my God, it's all on me, I have to figure everything out from scratch. It's, like, how do we take the pressure off and integrate ourselves and humble ourselves, I think, as well, in the face of a discourse that is ongoing.
And I feel like that's awesome. And I think even that, as like, I don't know how to write sometimes. I need a co-writer. I need a director. I need a voice coach. I need a movement person. I need to fill my room with, like, I've written grants where I have like 8 co-creators. And they're like, why would we pay this many people? That's sometimes the response. And other people are like, oh, good. You're doing the work to have the room that can support the work. And all these artists' minds are on it. I think this point about we're not in silos. Somehow it's like, maybe that's training and we were competitive with one another or something. I don't know. But like, again, oh my God, it's such a relief to not be the only one having any thought, and then and finding the support. Or like, can you help me write grants? Can you like stand? I don't want to be a producer. Like, I don't like it. I don't like standing in front of my work. My job is to do like my show, and the 3 of you can talk about what we talked about for years making that show. I can't do it no more. I want to go to bed or, go back to my family or something. Yeah, it's not fair. It's not fair, Grums, to like ask you like the combination of all that thinking was there, and then the vulnerability of revealing and then having to discuss what you were doing, and then you, anyway, the show that we did, I just did, the show traveled with a producer who would speak to the audience about it if anyone had questions. And I know, oh, anyway, I feel like that's a really good thing, that somebody else who can be the voice box for your show and defend it, like all those things that are being asked of you, it's too much. You're right, it is too much. And then we go into funding issues, and that's a whole other story. Like, how do you get the money to pay that person? I don't know. Anyway.
Well, I'll just chime in and say thank you all for speaking up. I can relate to pretty much everything everyone is saying. And another challenge on top of that is for me sometimes is just to keep going, and to allow myself to be seen. I feel a lot of times my show isn't seen by people that should see it because it's misunderstood, and they don't. And I have to think about how to market it also, like in a way that more people will see it, that they think, I don't know, it's just some dumb hoser comedy show, you know. And funding as well. Nobody has ever funded it yet. I've tried a lot of times, but I have been having a lot of trouble getting support, and I feel it's because it's not seen. And yeah, that's all I'll say to that. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Candy. Thanks, everyone. I think we would, be wrong to not talk about the harm that can be caused by artists misrepresenting gender or utilizing gender as simply a joke. And we've chatted about this as a team in our initial meeting as a panel. So I'm curious about what are some considerations that should be at the forefront of work that examines and explores gender as a concept or uses it as a tool.
I'll just speak up a little bit here. I recently had an experience where I have a trans friend, and I caused some harm by something I said, and I already was afraid to speak to them in the first place because I was afraid I was going to say something wrong. So I did my best, but I said something wrong. And so since then, I've been looking at ways to learn about how to be a better ally. And I just want to mention one person that has been amazing for me on Instagram. He's a trans man who does education. They're at Pink Manta Ray, and maybe I'll put it in the chat for people. Such a lovely human, and I've learned so much from him. So I would recommend that. And that is one thing that I've been doing. I, of course, think about that often. The last thing I want to do is harm anybody, especially a trans person, as a cisgendered queer woman playing a man. I am not portraying a trans person, although there is definitely a gender or a scale within me. I feel that I slide between, I'm just all over the place between masculine and feminine. So it's more complicated than that. But so yeah, just educating myself on being a better ally has been something that I've been doing. So I will put it in the chat here for everybody. Thank you.
I think that brings up something that comes up for me a lot. Is part of our work is our personal work. It almost has very little to do with the art and a lot more to do with our own fragility. And you get this in anti-racist discourse as well, right? As part of our work, I'm speaking as a white person, is to do the work such that we can receive critique and change without shutting down, without disengaging, without being, well, I'm trying, right? And I think a similar thing really is true in all sorts of manners of receiving that feedback, which I read is very loving, actually, right? When people are willing to take us aside and go, hey, that was not great, or that made me feel X. I think that's a very loving act. And I think this also brings me to another thing about mitigating harm. I think is also who we seek feedback from and compensate, right? And I think it's one of the things about Grumm's practice that I really admire is how they bring a lot of people. Yeah, don't roll your eyes at me. How a lot of people are brought into that process all along, so that it's never just one person and a director or one person and a dramaturg shaping it in a silo, to use your word, Adam. But that we, like, how do we have multiple people in the room? Because trans folks aren't a monolith. No identity category is a monolith. So, and we can only really be ourselves, right? That's as creative performers, that's all we can be, is ourselves. And so how do we be in meaningful dialogue all throughout the creation? I think that's a strong harm mitigation strategy.
I had a thought as well. Everything everyone's saying is awesome, and then I think there's a three pillars of duty, if that's the right word. So the duty of the artist to like stay in conversation, to not be defensive, to be open, to change, to grow, of course, and the producers who to be in conversation with them so that they know their house better than I do as the artist, if that makes sense. So as a touring artist, I've gone places where I've been set up to fail and the room has thought I was one thing, like the show that I am this awful misogynist character. Like the line was like, Adam Lazarus has earned the right to tell his story. I'm like, oh my God, it's not me. And then they all think it's me and whatever. So that like the producer, that they know their house and they can educate their house as we come in. Again, that's not my job. And then the third is the audience. And so I think they come with whatever they're coming with, and there's so many X factors in there. And because harm will be caused. Like what happens if you're doing a show that like you intend to cause harm, but it misdirects and it fires over here? So whatever that, I hope that makes sense. That so even as the artist, like for me, it's like, and then the people around me that would travel with the show that can also take care of the audience afterwards. The audience can come and ask anything about the show before and after, whatever they need, and then the producers to like advertise it in the right way. And then some people are going to be harmed, and then that's tricky. And of course you don't want to, but then ideally you don't get defensive about it. I don't know what you do after. You do everything you can to mitigate that harm. Yeah. And I feel like I have a lot of specific examples around that, but I think the general one is beyond how people represent you. Like it feels like people, everyone's tired and they're like, oh, I don't know, it's a show. It's going to rock your socks. It's like, that is not what it's going to do. Rock your socks. Anyway. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this question. I think speaking to like, yeah, that fragility. Oftentimes if I come to someone and I go, hey, this is going to cause some harm. As someone that has had to do that, I see folks go find someone to agree with them, rather than listening to the person coming forward and saying, hey, this is causing harm. And I encourage everybody to lean into your loudest critics. I'm not saying all the time, I'm not saying like we have to totally make our work, because there's always going to be someone that doesn't like it. But I think if somebody comes to you and says, hey, this is causing harm, don't turn around and just try and find somebody with the same identity to give you a thumbs up, to give you the trans stamp of approval. I think this is also part about, the easy answer is hire trans people. Just hire us. Hire us to be a director or a dramaturg or to be in the room, because I think by having more people like who is going to be in your audience, specifically if we're playing with gender, you're going to have some folks to be able to like flag things that you probably didn't even think about. And it's thinking about like who feels safe in a theater and who already walking in probably doesn't, because maybe they got misgendered by front of house staff. Maybe they have to use a bathroom that they don't feel comfortable in. Like thinking about that already before the show even starts. Oh, and now I'm soapboxing. But I think the big thing for me is about intention versus impact. So we as clowns and makers, we have to be responsible to what the audience is laughing at. And if we're playing with gender, are they laughing at the thing that we are intending for them to laugh at? Or are they laughing about, oh, look how ridiculous it is for this person to perform this gender or this person to be costumed in that way? Being really specific about what they're laughing at. And I'll give you an example. There was a show I saw in Edinburgh where a cis male performer came out in a tiny, tiny little ill-fitting dress. And this is the like dude in a dress trope that we see in a lot of things, in Shakespeare, in movies, in modern comedies. And because it's someone I knew, I went to them and I said, hey, it's not okay. And this person stood behind, well, no, I wasn't playing it that way. I wasn't playing it that way. I was trying to play it really innocent. And even if it's not your intention to do that, the audience is laughing at you. There is a nuance here, but it's also being responsible for our audience. And being in that room as a trans person was immediately unsafe because the audience was laughing at that performer's body. And I know that it's like thinking steps ahead of our audience, and we don't want to have to do that, but we do want to think about like who are the most vulnerable people in the room and how do we keep them safe throughout the show, throughout the thing, even as a gender.
I feel like that's a bad joke though, like that's the joke is a bad joke, and ideally that performer would be like, should call the audience on laugh, like that should be on the table immediately. That's pretty lame. I don't know. Yeah.
This also calls up, though, I think something in terms of like training or in the ways that clowns are taught to think is often like follow the laugh kind of indiscriminately, right? And I understand in some ways why we're taught to do that, but it does lead almost directly to that sort of damage, right? Like, and I think there's also something that I think we should complicate in how we are trained, which is that if we are really in relationship with the audience, we'll understand what's going on, that we will understand the situation. And that is, I think, only true to a point. Right? Because we as clowns on the stage are in relationship with the audience as a mass, right? And so what that means is if you got two trans folks in the back in a room of 150 people and they're not having a good time, I don't trust that we will be feeling that. So that's another thing I think we need to be really careful with in the way that sometimes we talk about clown practice. And the way we defend ourselves, we're like, I was there, I was in that conversation, and that audience was having a blast, is only true as a wash, right? And so I just think there's something in the training and in the way that we understand our participation in the conversation with an audience that can allow for the understanding of that nuance and the way that harm can still be present even in uproarious laughter, right?
Yeah, there's this thing in training. Sorry, does anyone want to say something? I had a thought about training. Like,
go for it, Adam. Yeah.
Part of the challenge, I think, too, is like what I like to do in training is build trust, of course, first. And like, why would you trust me? And that's number one. Because the question I always have is like, you're going to mess up here, and this is the place to do it. And where's the line? I don't want you to think about lines. I want you to cross them, and then we're going to discuss. Or we're going to figure it out. Like, and that is the best, because I'm entering with, I don't know. I really don't know, and I need help with understanding if this is funny or not. Like, my instincts, I think, are good, but they're not perfect by any means. And I was taught by, like, a guru. You know what I mean? And, like, that ended at the end of my relationship with this person. I'm like, I'm done. I don't want to look at anyone like they know everything, because if you purport to know everything back to me, I hate you. Like, when I graduated, I would not get on my knees to receive my fucking diploma. I'm like, no, why? Don't make me kneel. Anyway, so, but I feel like that as a teacher, and that's really important. And I've been called out on endless things. They're like, we don't speak like that anymore. You're being ableist. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. Like, I was taught for Buffon, let's cut off arms, let's cut off legs, let's represent dwarves from the Middle Ages. And an amputee friend of mine was like, I don't know what to do with this, but say exactly what you said, Grums. You can get out of that costume. I can't. Just putting that out there. And I'm like, why do I even teach like that then? I don't have to. It's not like the only way is we have to be ableist. And I think there's training that was that. It was like, you had trans was Buffon. So like anyone, let's have trans day, and let's have dwarf day, and let's have Jews going to the oven day. And like, kind of yes, but kind of like, this feels weird. So I think, what do you want to talk about? And I ask like, what is the body that can get away with saying the things that you want to say? And when I say get away with, that's very particular to Buffon. Yeah, anyway. So it's fascinating. I'll stop.
Yeah, that's great. Go, Zachary.
I know that the art form of drag comes under, is in the discussion a lot about misogyny and transphobia and harm in misrepresenting gender. There's like a lot of very popular, highly platformed drag artists who engage in work, which is the discussion of how problematic it is like very, very much on the table. Like, you think of people like Jimbo, for example, whose like whole practice is kind of like the exaggeration of the female body, and that's kind of the joke, which is why it's so under fire a lot. And sorry, I'm just trying to collect my thoughts, just because it's like, I mean, I think drag is also, I think that there is also more possibility for harm, just because it's an art form that is like pretty unregulated a lot of the time, because it's usually like an open stage drag show, like in a bar at 11 p.m. There's not a lot of curation that happens before that. It's so you kind of go into it, it's assuming everybody will have the best intention, because it's a lot of like impoverished queer people who are getting on stage and owning something about themselves that has either been repressed or attacked, and they need to express what they need to express. And so I think I agree with Grums and Charlie talking about intention versus impact, where you want to assume the best of your community, but then that doesn't change impact. Like, intention is one thing, but it doesn't change what it might do to someone. And so I think it is important to hold your community accountable and to be open to those discussions, and to feel safe in going to someone and saying, hey, this is how your art impacted me in a negative way. And I agree, like, lean into your biggest critics. I think that's super important. And like, ask them why they felt it was necessary to do the thing that they did, and then explain to them maybe why that it didn't have the effect that they wanted it to have, and explain to them why this could be seen as the wrong thing to do. Yeah. Sorry, I'm struggling to kind of keep my train of thought on track.
I can jump in on that, Zachary, because I think there's lots of really great stuff. I think, especially thinking about sort of the intersecting identities. You talk about poverty, you talk about like all of these, I think as well, of how drag or other types of performance, in my own case, have helped me understand my own experience, my own identity. And so I think we also have to make space for that, for the ways in which these art forms can help us in our personal lives. And this is why I propose, or in the current place that I'm thinking about, I'm thinking a lot about what the purpose of a certain space is. And I'm thinking a lot in terms of training, and I come from a very specific tradition, the pachinko sort of style of training in clown. And I think one of the things that's so great about that is the early thing is a womb, right? And all of that, it's personal, it's my own development, and it's myself in relationship to myself. And my classmates are there to witness, but they're not an audience, right? And so I think this speaks to what you're talking about, Adam, as well. But I think we have to set that space up, and I think we have to be really active about that. So when I'm brought into that space, have to know that this is my space, but also that it's my classmates' space. And it's not a performance, it's not curated, it is, John Turner calls it a vomiting, right? And that's important. But I need to know that to be safe in that space, that people are gonna vomit things that aren't, and so we as teachers have to hold that. And I think similarly in drag shows, like when we do a first drag show and it's like, this is to introduce a bunch of baby queers to the stage, like how do we curate that for an audience so that they are also held in the knowledge that this is not a curated, and so there's ways to curate that for the people who are being trained and for the people who are invited to witness that training. But then also, how do we in the training and in our work as professionals go, okay, so what I do in the studio or in the training is held and is sacred and is as for me as much as anything. But the moment I bring it to an audience, I have a different obligation. I have an obligation to consider the work differently, and the ways in which whatever I've vomited up now is in conversation. And so I have different responsibilities in conversation than I do in the private world. So I think thinking really separately about training or creation and performance is really important to me right now, and in terms of safety for us and for audiences.
Yeah, I think that's great, Charlie, and thanks for everybody for saying that. And what this kind of makes me think about is this conversation we had on Friday surrounding the idea of how do we then engage with gender or anything, but specifically for the panel, engage with gender in ways that are not transphobic, but that also don't reify gendered norms. And I think that leads me into the next question of and how it relates to it, of how do you imagine that making work related to gender might change your audience's perspectives, or what do you hope will change while not being transphobic, while not reifying stereotypes that we see being enacted, right? So how do you imagine that making work related to gender might change your audience's perspectives, and what do you hope will change?
I think a lot about, I have a friend who's a stand-up comic, and I'm going to steal her joke here, where oftentimes I am the first trans person people will meet in the wild. So one of the things I think I have as a responsibility, but also is to put trans bodies on stage, particularly in the prairies, because it could be your audience's first time ever seeing a trans body on stage. And I think that in itself, and seeing more trans bodies and consuming trans art and stories can only help change that as a jumping off point for this conversation. I have more thoughts, but
I think it's also about the multiplicity of stories, right? Like, and I was having this conversation with a partner earlier about how like every story matters more when it's the only one, when it's the only trans story in the season or the only trans story in many seasons.
It's too much pressure,
right? And the same with all kinds of things. This is the only like overtly feminist story that's being told, and so all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is womanhood, right? Or and that's a dangerous sort of thing. And because I think of like, I'm going to sing Grummett's praise because I think they're great. Like this idea that we have not just a gender binary, but we have, masculine and feminine and sea monster is a great like way of framing that for me, right? Like my gender is not somewhere in the middle of those things. It's way over here. Try to put sea monster in a continuum, right? Like good luck. And that's one thing. There is also folks who are agender. And it's a negation. It's a nix. And like, so how do we wrestle with how that's represented, right? And how do we also understand trans femininity or trans masculinity, and those are all different stories, right? And so part of the work, I think, in the plurality is, if we only have one story, that story has to do all of the work, and it can't possibly, and none of us can possibly, right? Because we can only really speak from our own experiences. My particular experience of gender is not Grumm's experience of gender, is not a trans woman's experience of gender, is not. Yeah, so.
Yeah, go for it.
I have two thoughts. The first one is, I was just in Philadelphia working with a few artists, and two of them are trans, and they're doing this awesome gender show, and I'm like, oh, I want to be in that room. So it also goes the opposite to, like, I have experience that I'm so happy to be in those rooms, and I'm trying, like, help and refine text and image in ways that I know based on my experience. So I feel like that's how it shifts to, is like to make the tables bigger, or I don't even know what I'm saying when I say that, but you know what I mean, I think. And the other thing I think about is, I think about, like, spaces, and I remember doing a show, and it was like really weird show, and then this artistic director watched it, and they were like, it's a great show, and I was like, oh great, do you want to program it? And they're like, never. I cannot throw $100,000 at that thing. I loved it in this little festival. Perfect. And so there's, like, an understanding of, like, what the system does, you know what I mean, and what plays play where. And then I think about the history of Toronto, like in the, I don't even remember when, early 2000s, there was like 50 different venues where you could do your thing. And so we're building an audience, and so that, like, you could go into maybe a season if that was your goal eventually. So I think, I'm like, this, you know, pandemic is so weird. I don't even know what's happening anymore in the world, let alone, you know, my backyard. I mean, my backyard, let alone the world. Anyway, but I'm like, oh, we need those cabarets again, and, like, these spaces where people just go. Speaking to your idea of setting up, it was like, we knew, like, this is a night out of, like, awesome art. And I think those spaces are not happening as much because people are afraid of risk. So it's like, it's up to us. We got to make them. And then, like, I don't want to be a producer, but I kind of have to, you know? So that's how I don't even remember the question no more. Something around that.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're all right. I think that's all great ways of looking at it. Candy, I'd like to speak specifically about Larry in this moment, just with regards to how doing that show, you know, how that might change your audience's perspectives, or what you hope to enact through Larry.
Well, I guess one point of being a stupid poser comedy show is that I do sometimes have people watch it thinking they're just gonna watch a funny show, and then they end up crying in the middle of it. And one of my favorite quotes from somebody that they posted was, 3 hours later and my wife and I are still walking around the block arguing about Larry. So there's conversation. I guess that's a start, people talking, you know. I've had, like, wives, you know, of, like, small town folks being like, see, honey, that's how it is for us women, you know, like, that's how you are to us, you know. So, you know, those are small things, but just conversation. And then I have had a lot of trans people approach me also and thank me for my work and say that they saw themselves in it, you know, and that makes me feel really good. And I'm so there to listen for the critique also. And I really, like, Grums, you lit a light bulb up in my head. I was like, I should have a trans person in the room with me next round, like, to work with my dramaturge and just to consult with. So I definitely want to do that. I'm going to do that on my next round. So
really,
yeah.
I'm just here to get more trans people money.
Right.
That's my goal of the panel.
Perfect. Well, it's coming to you. So yeah, that's a little bit about Larry. Yeah, I think it's the different perspective, the conversation, even just seeing something that they might not have seen before, and it's a little bit more normal. It would be great to see all of the likes of our shows become more mainstream, actually, like in the civic theaters. Grums, I think your show would be an amazing school tour. And I have some ideas for you because I've been touring schools, and I think it would be awesome there. So yeah, it'd be nice to see more mainstream. Yeah, someone else?
Zachary, do you want to add in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I realize I think that I come from a pretty privileged perspective where like I pretty much only interact with queer people. So like I do drag as my full-time job. I'm pretty much only seeing queer people. I quit my serving job, so I'm not surrounded by like straight anti-vaxxer servers. Like I was like, gotta get out of here. So I think I do have this kind of like in a bubble utopian perspective of queerness. And when I talk about queerness, and I do realize that sometimes when I talk about it, I do forget, just because of my situation, that we are still facing so many issues. And I think that with my art, which is so celebratory of dismantling traumas surrounding queerness and sexuality and gender expression, that I hope that if somebody just comes to that show, if they are on a journey similar to mine, that they feel more empowered to be more authentically themselves. And if they are somebody who is not on that journey, who is very firmly like cis, although from my utopian bubble perspective, cis people, I don't think so. That's over. Nobody's fully cis, in my opinion, anyway. But I hope that if they see that show, it at least they get to sit there and experience queer, feminine, masculine, void of all gender joy, and they are just a little bit more allied, maybe a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more compassionate, and a little bit more excited to pursue similar to mine.
Thanks, Zachary. Yeah, go Grums or Charlie, yeah.
The other thing I think about and what I hope to change is like who's coming to the theater. Because I think, and I think I also was living in this little indie theater bubble, this little fringe theater bubble of going to the theater and seeing all the queer weirdos that go to the theater. And then I went back to my regional theater, and I was like, oh my God, it's still the same. It's still the same audience of like very white, very upper class, very middle class, very cis, very straight. And making shows, like I find it incredible when a show I do pulls in a totally different audience than the typical subscriber base of a theater going audience. And I did a show once where somebody, I think our stage manager commented, I've never seen this amount of weird hair color and side shaves at a show. And I was like, yay! And I think that is what I hope for, and that is what I hope to change, because then that's going to prove to the big theaters that they can change their audience base, because I still think that oftentimes the reason queer work gets, put on the backstages and put in the underground spaces and not taken seriously is because they think that subscriber base is the be-all and end-all. And it's really not. And that there is an audience out there, and it's just, the shows that you are getting put on stage is what's determining that. I don't know. People have said this far more, that I'm not saying anything that original.
And just to riff on this awesome conversation that you folks are saying, thank you so much. I'm also thinking of Yvette Nolan, who says, more makes more. And I think one of the things we have to resist in this is any sort of hierarchizing. Like, it is important that there are more trans stories. Absolutely. It is important there's more queer, very broadly stories. And it's not about replacing. Because I think that's the other, like the siloing again, right, is a risk, right? And so I think we have to be in broad conversation and in lots of different types of conversation, right? So it's not, and the risk, I think, of the siloing is also like, it's not just the trans stories that need trans artists, not just the trans stories that need trans artists, right? Like, it's all stories. And there's a risk of the siloing of going, oh, well, that's over there for them. We don't have to think about that on this main stage because it's As You Like It. And you absolutely do on As You Like It, right? Like, so I think there's something to resist there in resisting the hierarchy and resisting the siloing.
Yeah, I think that's great. And thanks to everybody for all of that. We'll move on to one of like our last questions here. And so this is just a gentle reminder for the folks who are joining us online. If you have questions, start maybe putting them in the YouTube box so that we can get to a few of them at the end if there's time. But what I think we should finish off in this last few minutes is to talk a little bit about when you think about the challenges in society related to gender. So that's perspectives, representation, misrepresentation, oppression. What gets you excited to make your work? What are some things that inspire you, or some projects that give you hope? Things like that. So I'll just toss that out as sort of a broad concept, but something for us to riff on for a few minutes here.
When I was younger, I spoke. I mean, I've always had a more. I've never spoken in like a deep, traditionally masculine tone. So when I was younger, a lot of the time, my parents would say to me, and I know that this came from a place of trying to protect me, but a thing I heard a lot was speak with your real voice, because they thought that because I was speaking in a higher register that I was speaking in an affectation, and that my real voice would be like down here. That was going to be my real voice. And it always really upset me that my family thought that I was doing something on purpose to put myself in harm's way, that I was going out of my way to not speak in my real voice. And I think about that all the time when I get into drag. That when I am dressed up, when I have a wig on my head, when I have a face full of makeup and I'm screaming, "How the fuck are you?" at an audience of people, that I, for the first time, am really and truly speaking in my real voice. And that to me excites me to pursue my craft. And I hope that when I get on stage and I wear my 3-inch foam padded ass, that somebody in the audience who maybe has been told that they are being too much, that they are being inauthentic just because of the perceptions of like the shitty people around them, that they can look at me and that they can think to themselves, they're speaking authentically. Now it's my turn to speak authentically. Also, I just love looking really hot.
I was like trying not to cry because I'm like, I have to be on stage soon. Yeah, I think a lot about, it's a really fucking scary time to be trans or gender nonconforming or be anything that's not a cis-binary. There's a lot of hate coming for trans people right now. There's a lot, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. These elections coming up, it's going to get worse. Not to be the world is ending person, but it's going to get worse. And I think about like how badly we need trans joy right now, and how badly I don't need to see another trauma play about the trans identities made by people that aren't trans. And we really need joy. And the thing that lights a fire under my ass to be like more trans people everywhere. But I think a lot about how things are changing and how things are different than when I was a wee one. And like I never saw work with trans people on stage or genderqueer people on stage. I never saw that growing up. I didn't know that I could be trans. And maybe it's just that I'm about to go do the kids show and I'm going to try and not get choked up about this, but I love when it feels like my work is obsolete and that kids in the audience can go, yeah, whatever, you're trans, so what? So's all my friends. And I love that. And I want more of that. And I want to be on stage and be a relic for them. And be just a tired old, like, so that gives me so much hope, is to be in spaces where that is happening.
Amazing. I feel like this kind of relates to that a little bit. I'm inspired by my niece, Stella. She's 10 years old. And so far she's made 2 Larry videos with me playing my nephew, Louis. She loves to do it. And she tells me, she says, Auntie Candy, I'm too young to date, but if I was dating, I wouldn't care who I dated. I'd date a girl or a boy. And I just, that brings tears to my eyes. And it's just so normal for her to say that. And there's no fear or question or fear of judgment. That gives me hope. And like Grum says, just to let it become obsolete, they're just like, oh yeah, whatever, we've seen this, yeah, whatever, what else? So thank you.
Yeah, I have 2 kids, and I'd like to think that their view on gender is good. And that it will be obsolete, and the road is long, and maybe I won't be alive to see how the work is continuing to evolve. I do think the world's ending too, though. I think, no, you're not wrong, Grums. Like, sorry, let's just call it for what it is. I think, like, I had the same thing with this show that I did, Daughter. We were like, hopefully this show is obsolete, and it's like this dude behind glass, and there's like ticker tape with the words, and like people walk by, they're like, hey, remember when people were like that? Ideally, right? And I think, again, the road is long. I think what gets me excited, sometimes I feel it's less as an artist, like as a performer. I wonder if I was on a long journey with Buffon. I think I cracked it with this last show of mine, and now I'm not as angry anymore. So that doesn't get me as excited, because I used to be angry, and I think there's a lot more fun in being angry. But so what gets me excited is like looking outwards at other folks. And I feel like I want to say a few different people. There's this show in Philadelphia called Those with Two Clocks. Jen Kidwell and Mel Crodman, they're like 2 of the best theater artists I've ever worked with and met ever. And then as a teacher at TMU, some of those folks coming out of there, they're like fighty and mad and ready to take it all on. And that gives me, it's really exciting. I'm like, oh, this is it. And we're not done. And our roles as artists is to just keep showing up, I think. And it's hard. That's really hard, because we do have like the world saying, you're weird. Shush. All the things. I'm like, no, I don't want to shush. Not yet. Anyway, that's what's getting me excited.
Charlie, you want to add anything to that? You don't have to. Maybe you're not excited at all. That's fine as well.
I am excited. I think I'm excited. It feels like we're on the precipice of something. Like I'm really getting a sense of being called to learn the history of queer performance, of queer history broadly, but it also feels like we're just opening up so many conversations. So I think it's scary, because one of the risks of being on the precipice of something is it could be the precipice of fascism and climate disaster. And there's a not insubstantial risk that is what we were on the precipice of. And there's like the Star Trek is coming. The Star Trek timeline, we're right on track. So like
what does that mean? What does that mean?
Like, according to the Star Trek timeline, we have a world war to get through, and then the Vulcans come, and we end up in a post-scarcity utopia. So like, it could be that, right? We could be on the precipice of a post-scarcity global utopia.
The World War first.
We need the World War first, unfortunately. Anyway, I wasn't meaning to talk about Star Trek. That was not where I was going with that. What I wanted to presence in this before we leave is, I think there's some really interesting thinking that we didn't get to touch on in this panel that I think is worth just like naming into being here. And this is especially about this really great like thinking and about race and gender that we didn't get to touch on and this panel hasn't really explored. And it's just worth naming. I'm thinking the work of the Argentine thinker Maria Lugones, the Puerto Rican thinker Ramon Gross-Fugel, and these folks are talking about the ways in which gender is not only put upon bodies, although it's also put upon different bodies differently. And so I think just like the ways in which like the colonial project doesn't give colonized subjects the same access to gender that it gives to colonizing subjects. And so like that, introducing that to queer thinking and gender thinking, that we are all gendered and we are all gendered differently depending on our place in this colonial process. There's so much potential there, right? There's so much potential for things that we haven't seen on stages yet, things that so that's what excites me. I'm like, we're gonna see stuff coming forward that will blow our minds and blow our perspectives, and that's why I go to the theater every time. I sit down going, maybe this time it'll do it, and sometimes it does. So that gives me hope.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks so much. And thank you to everybody else. I'm just looking at the time. It's 2:26 here in Alberta. And I'm seeing, I know that there's still some shows to get through today at the festival. I know Grums is doing their performance this afternoon. So I think there's no questions so far in the chat, which is totally fine. There will be many opportunities, I'm sure, for conversations like this to keep going. So please don't feel pressured to do that. Just while we are wrapping up here, I wanted to say a few more thank yous. A thank you to everybody on the panel. Thank you, Charlie, Adam, Grums, Candy, Zachary. It's been excellent. So grateful to have you all here. Massive thank you to the Play the Fool Festival and Hit That Jive Productions, Christine Leziak, Julie Karali, Kijo Gatama, Lindy, thank you so much. Tanzi, awesome. Thank you for the captions, and to all the funders and supporters who make this festival possible. If you want to know a little bit more about the last day of events, there are still some shows to go see. There's a cabaret, there's a triple bill, there's Grums' show. You can go check out all those at playthefool.ca/2022-schedule. So you can go check that out. Let's finish on a one-word checkout for how you're leaving this panel. What's your vibe? What's your hope? What's your word or a phrase, word or a sentence? We'll do that. Not to, come down on you on one word only, but.
Full for the space.
It's like looking around, I'm like, I don't know, balanced essential oil candle. Synergy. That's my kombucha drink. I'm going to say synergy.
Let's go.
Yeah, resilient.
Grateful, thank you.
Yeah, and joyous. I think this has been excellent. Thank you so much to all the panelists and everybody for tuning in today. My name is Jake Tkaczyk, and I'll see you at the next one. Have a good rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Did we just hop off? It's over. All right.